All right, let's talk about strata windups because strata windups are becoming a very, very big conversation, particularly amongst older strata corporations within the province of BC. So, if you are living in a condo or a townhouse complex, particularly if they're built in the 1970s or older, maybe even now some in the 1980s, a lot of these stratas are looking to sell to developers as a way of getting out of their product. And what they're hoping to do is cash in on a whole bunch of money because you're going to sell to a big rich developer who is then going to take those properties, tear them down, and build something even more dense and make a whole lot of money because Vancouver, Surrey, BC real estate is all very, very expensive real estate. So that's what we're going to talk about, strata windups from a kind of a 10,000-foot view, to just kind of give you an idea, if you're in this situation, what to expect, because this is definitely not what you're expecting when you're approached by a developer to have your entire strata complex sold as one big chunk. But really quick, before I get into that, this is a Surrey, Fraser Valley, lower mainland of BC real estate channel. So if you would like to stay up to date on the market, please subscribe and also click the like button because that helps me get this information out to other people. And I am a real estate agent. So if you need help in the Fraser Valley or anywhere in Greater Vancouver, please reach out by booking a call right down below using the link in the description. And maybe we can help you out, whatever that happens to look like in your real estate journey. Now, let's talk about what a strata windup is. A strata windup is an older, usually older strata complex or apartment building, or maybe it's a big townhouse development, but they're generally older, and at one point in time they will not have as much value. They're going to be older types of construction, they need lots of maintenance, and realistically, if a complex was developed in, say, the 1970s and they're still around today, you're going to have likely higher density allowed in that same area. So what does that mean? It means that instead of just selling one unit at a time, which will still happen throughout this whole process, I mean, sellers will just move on and not want to stick with the timeline that we'll talk about a little bit later on. Those transactions will still continue, but the strata can sell as a whole. Now, what used to happen is you used to need 100% of all of the owners to get together and agree that they were going to sell. But in more recent years, that has actually been dropped down to 80%. Now, sometimes developers will reach out to these old stratas that they've identified as being good purchases and prime for redevelopment, or you may be approached by, say, a real estate agent, and they'll put them on the market for sale out to the developers. So those developers then know which ones are considering, which stratas are considering doing a windup. Or most likely, you're probably going to have some owners within a complex that think that this strata windup is the best course of action. And the reason they think that is because they think they're going to get a very, very high dollar volume, which they actually may. Because if the units are going to be redeveloped into higher density, then obviously that land is worth a whole lot more. But then that brings in the conversation about value. When it comes to value in a strata windup, you have three possible options. One, which is the most common train of thought, is that the developer is going to pay you more than market value. Let me give you an example. Say you have a $700,000 older townhome in Wally in Surrey, the area that I service most often. If that can then be rezoned into, I don't know, 6-story mid-rise, or maybe even the big lotto winning, 45-story tower, then it would make sense that you could sell your unit for more than market value, up to sometimes about 100 to 150% of market value. And then the developer thinks that's a deal because they're acquiring the land of which they can make a whole lot of money on when they redevelop the many, many stories or higher density in the future. Now, this is probably more rooted in the fact that people consider that it's the same as a single family home, but a single family home with one family living in that property rezoning to a 40-story condo high rise, that's obviously much more lucrative for the individual owner. But if you already have, say, 100 units, the chances are that you're going to sell for more than market value, well, they start to drop. Then you have the option of market value, obviously. Now, market value is obviously a very easy thing to find out when you have an arm's length transaction, say, for instance, on the MLS system. You have that arm's length transaction. A buyer tells you where value is. A seller decides whether or not they're going to agree. But generally speaking, market value can be determined by looking at most recent sales. Then you get into the debate of, well, is this one worth more than that one because it's got upgrades and if the owner's done some renovations or it's a better spot in the complex. That's market value for the point of view of a developer. They're not really interested if there's a better spot in the complex or if one has more. They actually don't want a unit that's more upgraded, but more on that in a second. Or you could have the possibility that the developer, because they're buying all of them at the same time, they almost want like I guess what you would call like a bundled discount, like a bulk purchase price. So therefore, they may want to actually purchase the properties altogether, but for a lower price. But as a seller, who the heck in their right mind would sell for less than market value? Well, those people would do probably an off market deal in order to get sold very, very quickly. And a strata windup is not a quick process. So the chances of a strata windup selling for under market value are very slim. So now let's focus on what people think is going to happen. They believe that if the developer approaches them specifically, or if they're going to sell to a developer, they're going to sell for above market value because the developer is going to make a whole bunch of money and they want to be able to share in that profit. And I understand that. So, what I'm seeing going around in strata corporations, when I'm reading their minutes, when I'm talking to clients who are getting emails from their strata, here's what people are saying. And you may be hearing this in your own strata as well. Often there's one or two owners that will be going around saying, we're not going to sell this unit altogether or this as one big strata windup to one developer. The reason is the developers are trying to lowball us. These are obviously the owners that think they're going to sell for more than market value, and they think there's just greedy developers out there and they don't understand the math of a development and exactly how that development is also going to be profitable. And tell you what, the profit is generally not just in the raw land itself, it's in the development. So if you want to be a part of the big profit winnings of some sort of a development, guess what? You need to be the developer or you need to partner with the developer. And I don't know, if you were in a single family home and you were selling to a developer, part of the deal might be that you hold on to the property for a very high dollar volume for a lot amount of years so they don't have to finance that in the short term. Well, this is just really simply not the case in a strata windup. Generally speaking, there is not a bunch of stupid developers out there who just want to pay too much for a property. They know their numbers, they know what they need to make to get their profits when they go to sell, and they're not going to offer you more than what makes sense. And this is usually where things come to a head with a strata windup because there's always going to be usually, again, more than that 20% of owners who want to sell for a crazy high price and things tend to stop. I get lots of conversations going back and forth every single week, I would say, where a client reached out to me, hey, this developer or this realtor or my strata council has told us that we're thinking about winding up the property. What should I expect? Well, if it's actually going to happen, which I would say most of the time it does not happen, here's what I think you should prep yourself for. Let's go back to the example that I don't even know if I finished earlier about like a $700,000 townhome. Let's say, for instance, on market, your home is worth $700,000. And to sell to the developer, the owners around you, they each want to sell for $1 million. So they want to see almost a 50% lift or so, somewhere around there, over and above market value because they're selling to a developer who's going to make a whole lot of money on the other end. Well, that may be true. I have seen that happen over time, but that's again going from say a very low density, maybe 1960s built townhouse complex to maybe 50, 60 story high rise. So there's a lot of profit that can be made. There's a lot of density that can be granted. But what is much more likely to happen is that your offer is going to come in around market value. And let me explain why this is most likely. Developers out there are not taking the approach of overpaying for land. They just obviously don't want to do it. They're usually pretty smart people and business people in the development space. However, what a developer will likely look for is properties. Again, this is why particularly older properties do so well in the strata windup space. They look for properties or stratas that need a whole lot of work. So let's go back to this $700,000 value. If you own a $700,000 townhouse in Surrey and there's a whole lot of maintenance that needs done because it's 50 or 60 years old, I'm not just talking a roof or some windows, but the entire building envelope, there's a very good chance that the strata has not saved enough to pay for all of that work to get done in their contingency reserve. As a result, there's likely going to be very large levies. Levies are payments that will be then due by each owner to get the work done. So, for instance, if you need to do a full envelope, meaning the siding, need to do things like water mains within the complex, expensive elevators, roofs, windows, electrical, plumbing. We're seeing lots of stratas have all of these things kind of come up at once because now, again, they're 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old buildings. So what the developers are doing, and what is most realistic for your situation, if a developer has approached your strata for a windup, is that they will say, tell you what, your place is worth $700,000. Don't worry about it. We're going to tear it down anyway. We're going to offer you market value for your property, $700,000, and it's probably done by square footage or something as arranged by unit entitlement or whatever it is. But let's stick with those easy numbers, $700,000, for instance. Now, instead of having that levy to each individual owner, which could be 100, 120, 200, $250,000. I've seen crazy levies like this. Instead of having those massive levies, of which then the owners have to each pay individually, the developers are going to those owners, those stratas, and saying, tell you what, don't worry about that. Sell to us at 700,000. We're not going to do the work. Eventually, we will just tear down this property. You end up whole. You don't have this, $150,000 assessment bill or $70,000 assessment bill to worry about, and you can walk away. And on top of that, there may or may not be real estate fees involved because who knows if the developers come direct. But that is the more likely scenario for most strata windups. The developers are finding properties that need a ton of work, and their solution for those owners is to not have the owner pay for all of this work that needs done. For instance, I was just talking to a client the other day where they're considering rebuilding the entire parkade of buildings. That there's 3 buildings involved. There's something like 50 years old or maybe older, 55 years old. And it's going to be probably tens of thousands, if not 6 figures of repairs to each individual unit. Obviously, larger units are going to take more of that brunt, and smaller units will be a little bit better off. But the developers within the strata windup are giving you an option out. And no matter what happens with the strata windup, whether or not you get more than market value because there's a high density there that the developer sees value in, or the developer is just trying to acquire a property that's in really, really rough shape so they can rebuild and the owners can be made whole. No matter what happens, there's a very, very, very high likelihood that you may not be there if you're considering selling anyway by the time the strata windup is done. I've seen these strata windups take 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years sometimes. It's just absolutely crazy how long it takes to not only first get everybody together, but then also find a developer that's willing to pay whatever the owners want. And then the developer isn't going to just give you your money in 3 months like a regular MLS sale would be. They're probably going to not want to complete on that property for 3, 4, 5 years after they come to a deal because they're putting together all the paperwork in order to start construction as soon as they own it. So the timeline is actually not what people think it is. So if you're thinking about selling now and your strata is considering winding up, there's a really good chance that it's going to happen many, many years down the road. Now, I have seen some very good success stories as well, where the developer did complete, say, a year or 2 years down the road, and then they let the owner stay in rent free for, 12 months or 24 months. But if your strata is looking to do a strata windup, don't plan on this being your savior if you're planning on moving even within the next 12 months. It's very likely that any strata windup would, in fact, just save you from having to finance or pay out an extremely large levy in the future, which unfortunately can cause many homeowners to have to sell anyway. If you are planning on moving within the next 12 months and you need help, well, you can book a call with me right now using the link in the description below. And if you are considering selling, and you want to know what it's going to take to get your home sold in this market, go ahead and watch this video right now.